Eh bien, bonjour ou rebonjour à toutes et à tous. Je suis ravie de vous accueillir pour cette toute dernière partie de notre événement Design Fusion. Alors, notre plateforme Quoi va vous permettre de suivre cette dernière keynote, soit en français, soit en néerlandais. Je vous invite aussi à communiquer avec nous via le chat tout le long de la keynote et surtout pour la dernière partie de questions-réponses. Et avant de vous laisser avec notre invité, Satyendra Pakhalé, mon partenaire Staan et moi-même allons redonner un petit peu de contexte à cet événement.
Hartelijk welkom, ook van mijn kant, op dit Design Fusion evenement. Ons event is het resultaat van een samenwerkingsproject, gesteund door Interreg, het project Tripod 2. En dit is eigenlijk meteen ook het moment om de 4-jarige samenwerking van dit project af te sluiten. We hebben heel veel boeiende projecten gedaan tijdens deze 4 jaar. Deze waren ook de insteek voor het programmering van vandaag. En we hopen dat dit jullie inspireert tot nieuwe grensoverschrijdende samenwerkingen.
Effectivement, je tiens aussi à préciser que nous avons tenté au mieux de respecter les normes sanitaires pour l'organisation de cet événement et notamment en transformant notre événement de manière totalement digitale, ce qui nous a permis de réunir une équipe plutôt restreinte et même si face à la caméra nous ne portons pas de masque, évidemment tout autour de nous, toutes les mesures sont respectées. Alors, ceci étant dit, juste quelques informations à propos du projet Tripod. Peut-être certains d'entre vous se disent, eh bien finalement, qu'est-ce que j'ai pu louper pendant ces 4 années? Eh bien, Tripod, c'est un projet collaboratif qui réunit 12 partenaires des Hauts-de-France, de Wallonië et de Flandre autour d'une ambition commune, celle de mettre le design à disposition des entreprises pour les aider à améliorer leur compétitivité et à innover, et aussi celle de rassembler une communauté de designers transfrontaliers.
Ons project bestond uit 3 pijlers: begeleiding, training en netwerking. Bij de begeleiding, daar gingen we bedrijven gaan koppelen met designers en we hielpen hen ook in die samenwerking. Bij de training, bij die opleiding, hielpen we bedrijven en designers om te werken met ontwerptools en bij de netwerking brachten we iedereen samen. Het event van vandaag is daar ook een concreet voorbeeld van. En uiteraard gebeurde dat allemaal grensoverschrijdend.
Et enfin, la mise en place de ce projet a surtout été permise grâce au programme Interreg France, Wallonie, Flandre et par extension grâce au portefeuille de projet Go2S3. Alors Interreg, c'est quoi? Eh bien Interreg, c'est un programme qui favorise les échanges sociaux et économiques entre nos 3 régions. Donc pour rappel, les Hauts-de-France, la Wallonie et la Flandre. Et donc c'est aussi cet aspect transfrontalier qui était une des plus-values du projet Tripod en parallèle du design, puisque nous avons pu ainsi croiser les cultures, les savoir-faire et les bonnes pratiques.
Beste deelnemer, als u nu pas het Tripod-project ontdekt, dan hoeft u helemaal niet bang te zijn. De projectpartners hebben de ambitie om de acties die we tijdens deze 4 jaar hebben ontwikkeld zeker verder te zetten. Dus als u nood hebt aan begeleiding, training of netwerking, dan kunt u bij de projectpartners van Tripod 2 zeker terecht. En dat zelfs allemaal ook weer grensoverschrijdend.
Effectivement, nous serons toujours à votre disposition et je vous invite aussi à vous rendre sur le site internet de Tripod où vous pourrez retrouver une publication finale de notre projet et en découvrir aussi un peu plus justement sur ce croisement entre design et transfrontalité. Alors je pense que Staan, on a assez parlé pour le moment encore une fois et donc je vais pouvoir laisser la parole à Céline Savoie, directrice de l'île Design pour vous introduire notre intervenant. Et petit rappel avant de vous laisser, n'hésitez pas à poser des questions sur le chat qui alimenteront notre dernière partie de questions-réponses. Céline, c'est à toi.
Merci Alice et Staan. Bonjour à tous. Il y a quelques mois, l'année dernière, je recevais la monographie de Satyendra Pakhalé au bureau qu'il avait lui-même pris soin de m'adresser. Et c'est avec un plaisir infini que je me replongeais dans ce que je connaissais de Satyendra des années 2000 et découvrais au fil des pages, 449 pour être exact, la suite de sa déjà grande carrière de designer industriel et d'architecte. Chapitre d'ailleurs enrichi de nombreux témoignages et contributeurs prestigieux tels que Alberto Alessi, Giulio Capellini ou encore Paola Antonelli. Au fil des semaines, son travail restait dans ma tête et je cherchais le moyen de pouvoir le partager au plus grand nombre. Au-delà des centaines d'objets pensés et conçus par Satyendra, l'intérêt de le faire témoigner ici est véritablement comment il envisage sa pratique de designer et comment il expérimente le monde via les projets développés dans les nombreux pays et continents dans lesquels il a officié. Il a donc été naturel pour moi de proposer au partenaire tripode Satyendra Pakhalé comme le designer candidat de la keynote autour de la thématique Can Design Create a Global Impact? Alors je vous livre ici rapidement quelques indications biographiques concernant son parcours. À la fin des années 80, Satyendra intègre le prestigieux Institut indien de technologie de Bombay, le Industrial Design Center, cette école étant fondée sur le modèle de l'école de design d'Ulm en Allemagne. Il obtient quelques années plus tard un Janus Award, un Janus de l'industrie remis par l'Institut français du design. Et c'est à cette période qu'il séjourne quelque temps à Paris, où il rencontre Philippe Starck, Pascal Mourgue ou encore Roger Talon. Il poursuit ensuite ses études à la très sélecte Art Center College of Design Europe, en Suisse, l'antenne européenne de l'école du même nom à Pasadena, en Californie. Il est, quelque temps après, repéré par Philips, qui l'intègre en tant que Senior Product Designer jusqu'en 1998. Il fonde ensuite son propre studio à Amsterdam, où il est d'ailleurs toujours basé. Il continue à beaucoup voyager et s'accorde chaque année un long séjour en Inde. Satyendra est très attaché à l'objet, au produit. Les process les plus complexes le passionnent, qu'ils soient artisanaux ou industriels, et il fait la démonstration régulièrement que l'artisanat et l'industrie peuvent cohabiter et s'inscrire dans un même projet. Il est obsédé autant par la low-tech que par la high-tech. Il s'accorde d'ailleurs ce recul que de produire un même objet en céramique, puis en fibre de verre ou en terre cuite, puis en corian. Il inclut l'histoire, le passé, mais aussi les références spirituelles dans les objets les plus contemporains et les plus technologiques. Il donne des conférences dans le monde entier. Moi-même, l'ayant découvert lors d'une conférence à Cape Town, organisée par Design Daba, c'était en 2006, quelque chose comme ça. Il a créé et dirigé le Master Design for Humanity and Sustainable Living à la Design Academy de Eindhoven, lorsque Lee Edelkort la dirigeait. Et son studio remporte régulièrement des prix prestigieux pour des industries de pointe, que ce soit le Red Hot Award, le International Design Award ou le Green Good Design Award. Ses créations intègrent les collections permanentes de musées mondiaux, comme le V&A à Londres, le Centre Pompidou à Paris ou le Museum of Fine Arts de Montréal. Bienvenue à toi, Satyendra. Nous sommes heureux de t'accueillir à Lille et de t'entendre sur ton métier de designer. Merci infiniment de ta venue, malgré les conditions difficiles que l'on connaît. Et je t'invite donc à prendre place sur scène et te donne la parole. Merci infiniment encore.
Thank you, Celine. Thank you for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here in Lille after many years, after 15 years. It was wonderful to do a great project here in 2006, and it is excited to be part of this event, which is a cross-border collaboration, something which I dearly cherish. And talking about design and how it could contribute or create a global impact. Of course, the simple answer to that is yes, design can and should and must create a global impact. It's easier said than done because one cannot set out to create impact. One cannot set out to create a great design, or one cannot set out to create a great classic, if you like to create one. I think it is a continuous practice. Design is, for me, a continuous practice of questioning and re-questioning, making, and that culture of creation itself is a primary foundation on which the design is based on and with which one creates. And I think with that kind of a zeal of asking questions and primary questions is what the foundation of design I believe in terms of creating something meaningful and hopefully something that will create impact. Now, that aside, what is, I think, really primary thing to understand when we talk about design, in my view, is the ideas. Ideas are actually reflection of one's thinking, one's worldview, and these ideas, unless they are transformed or massaged into reality, and that is the process of design. One could not create those kind of possibilities, new possibilities, what design stands for, and create possibly impact eventually. Now, whether something could create or not, one doesn't have to bother about those things. What really matters really is the actual act of creation. And here I'm going to share you some of the projects. Those are carried out over quarter century, almost 25 years now to date, and to show the relevance of some of those ideas, how they became more important now than before, or one could also say some of those ideas may be relevant, not relevant, What really becomes evident in these years, actually, that when you create something, you never know where it will land up, actually, what it eventually it will become. What you really do is actually understand the historic context, question the primary sense, and with the rigor and with the great zeal for genuinely doing something humanistic, you create. For me, in that sense, design is indeed primarily a humanistic cultural act. And when I talk about humanistic, I mean a secular humanistic act. In that sense, design is very much a universal language. And design, in that sense, is a part of every facet of our life, actually. Sadly, though, it is understood only in terms of objects, or only in terms of so-called design thing, whatever that means. I would try and show here a way of thinking, a possibility where one could ask these questions and understand how things could be. Now, I would start with a project done in 1996, that is 25 years ago, called Watch Me X, that is the nomadic health monitoring objects. Now, when these things were created, none of these technologies really existed, but the problem still is valid and existing in terms of the allergies we all have, in terms of the pollen count, or we have allergies related to the pollution and a smog, or allergies related to traffic and, of course, the pollution that comes with it. Something like, again, the pollen count, or something from the UV radiation, the exposure to skin cancer and those kind of things. Now, how one could monitor our environmental condition, that one could get, let's say, feedback on this. This was one of the conceptual ideas way back in 1996, where on what you see on the extreme left is the one for the smog. Then for the second one is for the pollen, and the last one is for the UV radiation. Now, these ideas were envisioned when these technologies were still in a state of infancy. They were not really real that time. They were in a process of happening. Now, these technologies are very much available for anybody to implement, apply, and they do still make sense. But during this process of creation, what we envision, a series of handheld objects, they become very ubiquitous right now. Like we have, almost everybody has the mobile devices in their pocket. These devices, nobody could envision what could be the societal impact of those things, in terms of what we have today, the problems we face today with the social media and so forth, But going back to these ideas, these were, again, a thought process of something which didn't exist then, and what it could bring to a society, or to bring to an individual, actually, in that sense, and help live better life in a way. Now, these things are very, very primary in my opinion. There are many questions, and especially now as we go through the current pandemic, the questions are many. No, they're not one. And these questions need to be understood, and the conditions need to be understood. And one of the aspect one could list down, there are many problems we have in a society around the world, and these disparities we have seen very much so in this current pandemic. And one of the things I do really think which we need to put away, thinking about cross-border collaborations, or thinking about whatever kind of collaborations we're doing, is the binaries we define the world, actually. And these binaries might be simplistic, maybe easier to talk, or they become maybe apparently easier to describe the world, but they could be extremely limiting. So the binaries which are often misleading, that is called east and west, where does the east starts, where does the west ends, I mean, these kind of things are really primary questions, and I really believed for a long time that this belonged to the past. These baggage should not come on me or our generation or the people who are active now. But unfortunately it does. There's so much concern about what is high-tech and what is low-tech and what is global and what is local. I think every local is global in a very primary sense, if you really think from that perspective. And I think if we keep aside these very, let's say, limiting way of defining the world, the possibilities of imaginations are endless. One could do whatever one could imagine in that sense. And in that sense of really creation, for me, design is act of unity. It is really a synthesis of unknown possibilities, otherwise not envisioned, otherwise not thought of, is what design is all about. Now, thinking from those perspectives, profoundly design to me is based on the ideas, the world perspective, the thought we have, the emotions we have, and these ideas are often extremely fragile, delicate, and the foundation of those ideas ought to be, in my view, if we really thinking about creating something for the built environment or the entire ecosystem. So the ecosystem meaning everybody involved, including birds. So in that sense, the common good is a very, very primary consideration. If we don't have that consideration, it can backfire. And what we see in a current pandemic, which is very, very, very evident, is that unless we take care of all sections of society, even in the self-interest of the people who have the possibility, the society is not safe. And there are many examples. I don't need to even cite one single example. We've seen in our face all these realities just months before, and they still continue to unfold in front of us. So design in that sense is to build the society, in my view. It's not the other way around. Society doesn't build design. Design builds, creates a society. And there is a possibility in every generation, and every opportunity we have is to recreate those possibilities, maybe object by object, project by project, or possibility one could think about even as a system. Having said that, I would like to take you to a little bit of a imaginary fantasy world, not bogged down with the reality we have. We have a lot of issues and challenges one could think about right now if one talks about what is happening around the world. Politically, socially, you see that there are tremendous troubles, But I will take you time to take you in a kind of imaginary space. Something like a decade ago, in 2011, actually, I was invited by the Moon Life Foundation to think about life on the moon. And generally, the space exploration is done by either governmental agencies or by military organizations. And here, the challenge was, can the creative people think about what could be the life on the moon? And thinking about the moon, actually, and possibility, one idea which I'm proposing here, which sounds like almost a teaser, but in fact it's a possibility. But before I get into talking about the project, what I would like to talk is many people, especially those who deny the climate reality, or especially those who say that the climate crisis is not the problem, I think those especially, and everybody around the world, should at least experience once in their lifetime the Earth rise, And as much as I say this in a provocative sense, I think there's a reality in a sense that once you see the beauty of where we come from as a planet, I think the view might change. That's a kind of almost assumption in a sense that people need to see that as ourselves from a distance. Having said that, the reality of experience of microgravity has been tried out. It is not something. This is already done by in the year 2006 or 7, I think, by Peter Diamandis. The great scientist Stephen Hawking was taken to experience zero gravity. And if you think that is possible, to take a person like that to experience a zero gravity, I think anybody of us are completely fit to go anywhere in the entire cosmos, if you like. And the great realities, that these things are possible, that sometimes we think these are not possibilities or realities, they could become reality actually sooner than we could think about. But that aside, I had a very amazing meeting with Peter Diamandis visiting us at the studio. That those conversations led to getting into all of these things and finally thinking about a project for the Moonlight Foundation where can there be a vehicle or a human-powered vehicle, that's a bicycle if you like to call it, for the moon actually. And physical exercise in a microgravity is very critical, very important, because you need to keep your muscles right, and because the gravity on the moon is 1/6 less than planet Earth. So how can we do that, you know? And this is, without getting too many into details, this was a study. You can see there's a bike, this is a prototype for a direct cranking, and from that comes this possibility of making something which could be used on a moon actually, but yet doesn't have the baggage of what we have generally things are associated with the space research, you know. And these projects, and besides that I created another project which I'm not sharing here right now, but because of lack of time, is the idea here is not really to talk about going to the moon itself, but the idea is to reflect on our condition and really make ourselves aware about our own realities. That was the primary need within this project, is to provoke these possibilities, you know. And having done these projects and many other technological projects, I was always keen and critical about the kind of consumption society we have around and the kind of lack of sensoriality we have in most of the industrial products actually, and how one could bring that sensoriality learning from some kind of objects which were created or millennia before actually, or the processes which were there. So I started searching for processes, and I came with this idea of engaging with a process called lost wax casting process, which is very ancient and which has been practiced almost all the cultures around the world since very ancient time. And I found this tribe in the middle of India where they were practicing this craft in a very specific manner. They were making a clay mold, and I took that process, refined it further to make objects of utility for that matter. So you have a clay mold, you make object, you collect the wax from the tree, you make a spaghetti out of the wax, and then you put the spaghetti on the top and you get one object. If everything goes fine, you have a final result, which is exactly opposite of, let's say, mass manufacturing. Not that I was trying to run away from mass manufacturing, not that I'm against it. What I was is looking for is to understand the value of creation itself actually. So you heat up the wax, you create the spaghetti of the wax like you see here, and then you place that wax very articulately to create what you create, you know. And then you cover it with the clay and you heat it up, the wax burns away, and what you get is a metal object, you know, it's bronze. Now, this was a very important exercise for me personally to understand the nature of creation of object itself, you know, to understand the value of object, to understand the symbology of object in a given life, and so forth, you know. Now, these exercises were very critical. They were early exercises as I started independently working, and that led one leading to another. I wanted to create a big object, and from that led to a symbolic piece of which became a BM horse. The same process we could not really employ, where here there's a natural wax. So we had to develop the new kind of material, new kind of process. Now, thanks to one company close to P0, they collaborated. We created a new kind of, let's say, rubber combined with some synthetic plastic to create the kind of flexibility we want. And from that, after remodeling and casting, which took us 7 years of work actually to create that piece actually. Now, that was a seminal piece of work in terms of exercise, in terms of making itself, you know, and the value of making in terms of a creation of object. That was a very important lesson in this process of creation. And while thinking about these things, what becomes also apparent that in an industrial culture, we lost the symbolic nature. Now, symbolic does not mean the symbol has to represent something, but there are associations one could create, and I think we need those new symbols and new possibilities, which often are missing. And that is exactly was one of the driving force behind creating and trying out these things. Now, leading from this thing, this is over a span of 15, 20 years, these objects are created. This is the last generation, third generation, where you see the object, the form of the object evolves from the process, the opening, the contours, the asymmetry. Now, what we call it is post three-dimensional 3D CAD objects, means you cannot envision them in even the latest CAD. You cannot envision them the way you want it. You can remake them, but you can't make them. This is what one has to understand in terms of making process, actually. And that is only possible thanks to this process. We cultivate it further and further to get to the kind of results we want, actually. So this, having talked about these kind of processes and products, that was never an idea to run away from mass manufacturing or industry or think about, because industrial collaboration is a very important thing. The contribution in a given society from industry is extremely significant. One cannot underestimate that. But also the mistakes that led to pollution, led to problematics, led to shallow consumer culture is also reality. One has to acknowledge, So that does not mean one has to reject industry, but one has to work with industry to take it in a right course of direction. That is the approach I personally believe in taking. Having said that, this is really an industrial design collaboration, a very intense collaboration with the manufacturer who has defined a new way of making certain things. Now, what I mean by new of making is often the processes and the things, how things are done for centuries, they continue, and then there's nothing wrong with that, those kind of traditions. But once in a while there's somebody comes and who recreates a possibility. Here, a company called FIAM taking an industrial produced glass, a glass which is often used in architectural setting, to create everyday objects and furniture. Now, glass, as we know, is a natural material. It's a very long-lasting material, and it's a very strong material. It's also fragile in some sense, but the way it is treated is also extremely durable. So when I was invited by FIAM to create a very seminal collaboration to engage with creating their flagship product, extensible table, it was a very amazing challenge. And when I visited the factory work was not a conventional furniture company, but almost like an aerospace kind of reality, where you heat this glass in a very predetermined way, and you shape them, you manipulate them in a given shape in the furnaces as you see here, to get to the results you want, and then they are tempered or high temperature, and then gradually they become extremely strong, actually. Now, when I wanted to think about the glass, which is extremely technological, I was really very, very, very driven and fascinated by one very keen observation by Hannah Arendt. She, being a political philosopher, talks about how table is a humble object which brings the people together. And for me, that was a very, very amazing insight by somebody who's not into object making or a designer or somebody who creates, but who observes and reflects on a human condition, talks about an object like table, which is a social object, which brings people together and remains invisible, as she describes. And I was set out to become something really genuinely invisible, metaphorically as well as in reality. Can one create almost an invisible table, actually? That was something I set out for myself to think about. Now, these are very big industrial operations. There's significant amount of investment there. There's a technology involved there. That's a water jet cutting of the leg of the table. Then there's a bending, there's a testing, all of this thing, because eventually the object has to fulfill all the safety requirement in any international context. And the idea I wanted to create was a very compact mechanism, which is almost like a jewel on a table, and it's from 2 meters it becomes 3 meters, actually. And when you explain this kind of possibility, and when you don't have actual prototype that is working, of course no industry believes in it. Nobody believes in it. Of course they think, well, this is just a fantasy idea from a designer. Of course it took a lot of work, prototypes and things like that, to create eventually a product that really works. That's one of the last thing. From 2 meters it becomes 3, and the mechanism, which after making several ways how one could fold the table, this is one of the final way the product works. And each aspect of the project is defined, each aspect of a project is thought through, and to create a possibility where, if you look at it, create the table, which really, when you have a 3 meter big table in a space, it occupies a lot of space. In this case, it really becomes almost invisible. So that's the 2 meter long table, and when you click open it, it becomes a 3 meter long table. And when you sit around it, it almost disappears physically, literally, you don't see it. So projects like that lead to another kind of reality, a thinking of something which makes sense and make even many more people respond to a project, like non-electric kitchen appliances. Now, allow me to jump from one project to another, because they come from very diverse type of industries, different kind of material, different kind of settings. But just to provoke imagination and allow the audience to think of possible possibilities one could create with design, here are some examples. Now, NECA is a non-electric kitchen appliance which comes out of my mind, which thinking about many age-old kitchen appliances, almost in every culture you see all around Europe, especially in southern Europe, southern France, even they are used even today. You see that many objects which were handheld object actually. Then we got the kitchen appliances, electric kitchen appliances, and that created a lot of trash. They are trashed very quickly. There are very few kitchen appliances which people use for a longer time actually, and especially the electric one. So can there be a possibility to create a non-electric kitchen appliance, So looking and studying these objects and understanding the developments we have in materials and processes, can we simplify the components? Can we simplify the objects where the cleaning after using the object does not become cumbersome or difficult, or it doesn't become a something of a complete mechanical gig, but an elegant, simple object actually. And the idea is to think about those possibilities, think about how it could be used. And we identified 3 possibilities of blender, mixer, and whisker, and created this collection of 3 objects, which is the base is made in metal, the other top is made in a polymer, and then you have a possibility to create, and everything is concealed in a way that you can separate it, wash them, and put together to use them effectively. Now, thanks to the kind of developments we have in material, the amount of effort it takes to use this object is a lot less than comparatively what you've seen as the historic manually operated objects. Now, this kind of thinking actually before, when it was spoken about, very few people responded. And now as we go through pandemic and people reflect on a lot of these issues related to ecology, related to energy consumption, they positively respond on objects like this, which is very fascinating and ironic actually to see that. Now, this thinking is still not a mainstream reality actually. Still these kind of projects remain kind of a exemplary one-off projects actually. But this is another possibility which need to be explored in many other areas where one could really understand, because many things what happened in last 50 to 70 years, that things were pushed for the technological sake, for the sake of consumption, and that's what created the throwaway products, many of them actually in many sectors of industry. I know I'm generalizing, but if one goes into specific sectors of industry, one can understand and see that there is a big room for innovation in terms of creating something, bringing back some kind of understanding of what was happening in the past, but not in a traditionalistic or not in a let's say rhetoric manner, but genuinely think about what are the new application of material and how one could bring that to reality and still have a possibility of creating object that is contemporary, that suits our life now. So these are some of those examples of non-electric appliances. Now from here I jumped to a project with a very big corporation, big company, from Italian company, Poltrona Frau. Again, this was a project which had a huge weight on the shoulder of a designer, in a sense that this was to design an armchair for their centenary celebration, to celebrate 100 years of the company. Now, this is the product they still produce since last 100 years, you know. Now, 100 years ago, it was quite cool to smoke a cigar. You had a gentleman's club. Even if you go to many train stations in France, you find the big grand cafes, and that was the reality. Now, today, smoking is uncool, but still we have this kind of a reference. And I was really thinking, if this product, which is manufactured by the same company, 100 years when it was conceived till now, and when I'm asked to think about a product which could hopefully last. I mean, this is very risky thing I'm saying. Nobody knows what will last, even for tomorrow. So it becomes very interesting exercise to think about what could be a possibility, what could be a long-lasting possibility. Now, when you think about long-lasting possibility, the materials become important, the processes become important, but above all, having thought about all those things, what becomes really important is what is the language of a product that will hopefully last for that long. And that's a hard question to answer, and that's really a self-imposed challenge. One could say that was not a part of the brief, and from there, what I was really set out to do, what could be that personal space that one could have as an armchair that is really suitable for us now and for many years to come, actually. So there are no gimmicks, there are no technology that you can press button, this happens, that happens, because those technologies, what they look like very advanced today, within no time they will look extremely primitive if you look at how the technological developments happen. So everything is really very basic and physical, the ergonomics, and what I came out with is to have a lap tray on which you can sit and use your mobile device. You have a side table, you have a poof, so you can basically use it for as long as you want, and it has just the basic ergonomics, you know. Now, the idea of a saddle making leather, to bring that kind of innovation into making of the piece like this, became the real issue, and that became the main image of the product, you know. And here you see each detail has been articulately studied, because the idea of a project like this, when you get a responsibility to create something to celebrate the 100 years, it has a potential to stay that long as well. And that is having no pretension about this. I say with all humility, it's the most toughest thing to do. And here you see every detail. You see the ergonomic studies, many prototypes, and from that you get the final product. So that's in production for quite some years now, actually, since 2012-14, actually. So the question is, again, here is a different kind of a continuation of heritage, but asking that primary question, what is relevant for today, actually. From there, I go to another project, which is very recently conceived and finished during this pandemic time, that is the last year. It has been one of my observations that when we look at the spaces and the public spaces, when I was invited by this historic company Wagi to think about public space, is that because of the mobile devices we don't have the same kind of a human interaction we used to have some years, even a decade ago, actually. So that means everybody's stuck in their mobile phone and nobody really engages in a physical environment. So the idea I had actually was, why not to create a bigger seat where two unknown people can sit and can strike a conversation. So that was the beginning of that model, and from there created a series of possibilities just from a single model. So from one model, actually, one could have many, many possibilities. So product like this, which was conceived for social cohesion, it became very important that how can we use such product as we are going through this pandemic. People will ask the question. So the question is, how can one go through this and understand the question of responding to the current need, actually. And from that came the solution that what was conceived for two people to sit during the pandemic, one person can use it and go from there. So that is more or less the final thing. From here, without further actually questioning of these areas, I wanted to just go into an area of healthcare. And healthcare is something which is, again, a very important area, but still not many designers active from outside engaging with this kind of industry. If you look at the current implants which you have across the world, many people are senior citizens, many other people are using the implants. But if you look at these products, they're extremely crudely made, actually. It's shocking how they're made. If you go and look at some bicycle parts or motorcycle parts, they are much more sophisticated. And these objects and these things, they go in our body. So it's very amazing that there is no design contribution in this kind of area. These are some technically thought out objects, and they're made in a precious material, and they're used on a human body, actually. So the idea was, how can one create a product which is genuinely helpful, which improves the utility in terms of its use when the surgeons use it, how it can support the bone and the body in a both in operational sense as well as for the patient or the individual when he or she uses it. So it became really a very innate study in terms of understanding the bone structure, understanding how the operations are done, and how the thing could be used. And from that, these series of objects came, actually. Now, these are very three-dimensionally contoured, taking really the use of our 3D technologies we have, the processes we have, the manufacturing possibilities we have. That led to possibility of a project like this, which again remains a very rare example within the context of design. From there, I would like to go to another project which is very much relevant in our time, which is happened just last year. Hardly 4 or 5 months ago, when some designer friends and colleagues from Shanghai, they got together to create a kind of possibility, thinking about what could be solutions we can think about for a current pandemic, actually. This is almost as we are going through the first phase of Corona. And if you look around what was happening then, that people were using gloves, it was very unclear. It was a big chaos in terms of understanding how the virus could attack people or what really happens. So you see lots of use of gloves, a lot of trash. You saw it all over, actually. And throwing so this was a reality. It is still a reality to a great extent. And what I was thinking about, can we create a simple bag where you have an integrated pouch where you can use it to open a door, close doors, or use public space or something like that. And from that create this kind of possibility where one could use either antibacterial material, a textile, and a possibility. So this was exhibited in Beijing some months ago. So these are some of the other thoughts where one could use or implement design in that kind of context. Going from there, I want to revisit one project for a simple reason, because this was conceived in 2008. It is a time when I was heading the Master Program of Design for Humanity and Sustainable Living. We wanted to create the product for vaccination. How does it get distributed across the planet, actually? And if you see the reality on our planet is extremely shocking. It's because how the world has developed and how the world has exploited. Having said that, this is how the current vaccinations are distributed, and this problem we're going to face as we go through this pandemic as well. So this is one of the solutions we created, where it is a modular system that can be stacked in both ways, and that can be used in a very effectively to carry on different kind of ways. A different kind of ways is manually using it on a vehicle, using it in a cargo plane, or all kind of sorts of things. So this cold chain really is an extreme reality or condition where things go from the World Health Organization, from Geneva all the way to any remote area on the planet, on a donkey or with the hand, or putting it on the shoulder, on the head. Not that I want to personally promote these possibilities, but that's the reality of our time, and we need to respond to those realities. And that's how the stacking could be, and that's how the way the communication for anybody to use it on a planet is there. And one of the possibilities is that it could be used also carrying on the head. I totally against carrying something on a head, because that's not ergonomic, that is not healthy for people to do it, but that's the reality of our planet. So that has also been taken into account. Now, seen from there, the last but not the least, I would like to conclude with one project which hopefully connects the dot with the talks we are having and the conversations we are leading to, is a radiator. Now, radiator has a very much a history in the previous pandemic. If you look at these radiators, these were created during last pandemic. They are not completely created for that, but the awareness of creating a healthy and let's say fresh environment for a living, where one could heat up internal space, was very much a contribution of that time. There was a fresh air movement. One could heat up the air, put next to the window, and the windows can be open. That was the kind of idea. Now, this is almost a 100-year-old product, which is still in use in big part of the world, actually, where heating is required. Now, the idea as the pandemic was unfolding that time led to this kind of adaptation and let's say contribution of design to the bigger society. Having said that, fast forward to early 2000, I was invited to create this radiator, and from that led to this possibility, which is a modular radiator, which is where I wanted to create a radiator which air passes through, and from that brings a possibility to create less energy. At the same time, you effectively heat the space without really losing the energy on a wall. So this is an industrial product which has gone through a series of development to become an industrial product, and finally that is the end result. Now, this is a kind of object could only come through when you ask a primary question, and that is the end result. So I do believe design has a potential to contribute in a wider sense, and one could do that only if we ask a primary question. Thank you.
Alors Satyendra, je vous remercie pour cette keynote et je vais vous proposer juste, alors moi, de récupérer la télécommande et vous de vous asseoir et de vous installer. Merci. Pour qu'on puisse passer à une session de questions-réponses. Et donc je vous invite tous à poser vos questions sur le chat pour qu'on puisse les recevoir. Mais en attendant, bien sûr, nous allons commencer à en poser quelques-unes. Et on va laisser aussi 2 secondes à Satyendra, le temps qu'il s'équipe pour que nous puissions tous bien nous comprendre.
Ja, oké. Satyendra. Dankjewel voor deze interessante en inspirerende keynote. Dankjewel om ook met je producten de linken te leggen met de uitdagingen van de wereld. Maar ik denk dat een van de meest prangende vragen die we allemaal hebben is, wat is uw visie eigenlijk van de invloed van het coronavirus op design?
Well, I think it's not the influence of coronavirus on design. I would say the other way around. What design can contribute to the troubles we saw within a society, that we can address them actually. The other way around, rather than corona having influence on us. I think we need to be in a driving seat to change the reality. So the idea is if we understand what, in a genuine sense, what design can contribute, in that sense, I think we need to understand what are the problems we have in a given society or the troubles we have. And I think address in a very broad sense. And in that primary sense, the current corona situation is an opportunity, just like what was happening in the last pandemic, that we could create a possibility where one could create, with the greater positive impact on a wider society, something that addresses those needs actually, rather than thinking what corona can do. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
On va donc passer à une question suivante. Satyendra, est-ce que vous pouvez me dire, selon vous, quels seront les impacts à long terme sur la société et l'environnement justement de ce virus et de cette pandémie?
I think the long-term impact should be a positive impact that it's up to us what impact we want to create actually. It is the discourse we want to lead to actually. I think the long-term impact is a very primary thing. I think one could learn from the past, from the history. I think the current situation we have, especially within Europe, I think, which need to be admired and has its own problematics, but it is better than many other parts of the world, is the universal health care. That has its own roots in last pandemic. There was no universal healthcare within Europe or any part of the world for that matter. Actually, it initiates in Russia, then it gets adopted within Europe, and then it spreads. And within European context, that is a very, very important contribution to the society. I think what we need to really realize, whatever the political beliefs are, whatever the ideologies are, whatever, keeping all those aside, what we need to understand and agree on, that is very, very primary, is that nobody is really safe unless we take care of all sections of society. And this kind of a situation, a pandemic, is a very actual evidence of that. And unless we realize that, and I think that is the biggest lesson we have, that the happiness of everybody, it depends on the welfare of all. And unless we understand that, I think we will not go anywhere from this pandemic. And I think that's the primary thing we need to take from this. And that can be then implemented in all sorts of policies and situations and problems. And I'm not saying, and I'm not glorifying, that there are no situations, and in each European country and societies there are troubles. And some of them are exposed recently, that the Netherlands government has resigned for whatever reasons, and there are such similar situations in other countries. I'm not saying there are none, but the situation is, compared to many other parts, is a bit better. That does not mean one has to relax and just sit on that glory. I think the idea of this thing is to show the leadership and create new possibilities, which hopefully becomes exemplary possibilities for the rest of the world as well.
Mm. Okay, thank you. I'll take the next question in English, because I think it was asked also in English, and I don't like the Dutch translation I see here on my screen. But so the question is, we have sensed your desire to develop products that meet the needs of users. Of course, I think it's the core of what design is. But in your studio, how do you get the users to question you? And how do you understand their needs?
This is a very, very, very important question. And in last 10, 15 years, I know you probably heard the thing called design thinking, and that is overuse and misuse. And then people say, hey, there was one, whatever the term come from, with all due respect to people who created it, I think, and then created all sorts of things. And if you really look at the history of design, every 10 years or so there is a new term comes and everybody uses it like there is nothing else, or there was nothing before and there will be nothing after. And 10 years later they forget about that, there's another term comes. The reason I'm saying that, please bear with me, is because to me, design and a designer is profoundly a person or individual or a team or a group of people or a group of organizations who are continuously engaged with this situation, continuously asking questions, continuously observing society. That is not because I've been given a project and I started asking questions. No. It is continuous. It's a mindset. It's a culture. It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. When you have that, you continuously engage questions, actually. And if you ask every user need and everything, you cannot ask every grandmother, with all due respect to our grannies, that they can think about what is the new possibility. It's not their task. It is not their job. They cannot be bothered by that. And the classic example of that, if the first automobile was made, if the people would have gone that time and asked everybody around what kind of user experience you want, they would have said, I need a faster horse. You would have never gotten an automobile. This we know. We would have never gotten, those who remember Walkman. You would have never had iPod. We would have never had iPhone. You would have never kind of device that I showed the first project, the health monitoring devices. You could not go in 1996 and ask anybody what will be that thing. Mm-hmm. They cannot. That is not their task. Mm-hmm. I cannot expect a heart surgeon who is operating on me to go and ask people, hey, how do I cut you? That is his professional proficiency. So for me, this is an absurd question, actually. It is in my, actually, capacity. I have to take all the responsibility and also the doubts and also the people I would like to engage with. So the question is not that you start doing research because you have a project. It's a continuous activity. And not to underestimate the ethnographic research and all of that. I mean, that has to be continuously happening. But that's not the result of a project for me. So I differ a big time when people talk about this as the core thing to create. And then all kind of question come co-creation and this and that. I'm not against that. But that has been there as long as the humanity has been there. That's not new for me. You see what I mean? Yeah? So that's why these questions for me are irrelevant, because they respond to, hey, this methodology, because the answer is not in a method. The answer is in your mindset. Because if you have a wrong mindset, you could never create what people really should have. Mm-hmm. So that's why I go back to the issue of ideas, to cultivate those ideas time and again and question them.
The mindset.
So I hope I'm clear on this.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course you are. Thank you. So I will also switch to English because it seems that I have some trouble with translation as well. So I will go on to the next question. And my question would be, so you express a need to develop products with like sustainable and objects. So do you feel that the industry has understood this issue and has adapted its strategy?
I think the trouble of the industry is, of course, you find different people responding to the different things, actually, and there are very, unfortunately, as yet now, genuinely people taking time to engage with this and create something new are less. I think what we really need is both. We cannot say that the industry alone can do it. And if I really understand the organizations you are all engaged with, I think it's also responsibility of an organization to create policies and frameworks. And unless we have those policies and framework, the industry cannot respond. And we cannot also, I'm not totally saying the industry has to be totally free. I think within a given condition, we also need guidelines and frameworks. And a simple example, if you look at the thing which creates the most pollution somehow in everyday life is the throwaway bags, what you use for shopping, the polyethylene bags, Now, unless we create a policy that such things should not be used, there is no change, because the industry has no incentive to change that. For them, it's the cheapest and the best in the given situation, So I would not really put everything on industry, because I think the errors which we have is that industry has all the responsibility. And I think we also, public organization also need to put checks and balances. I think it's important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Shall we switch to the next question?
Yes, please.
We talked about also cross-border collaborations. It was the core also of our project. How to convince those companies that are still skeptical about these cross-border collaborations?
I think the easiest, that's often is the trouble, because people who never experience is we go back to the provincial idea of not being cosmopolitan, not being engaging with the people. That's where the trouble happens. And I would go back to what I said earlier, is the only, let's say, the positive and concrete thing is to show the example. And I think when the example is clear, they can see the possibility, because otherwise it becomes just a hollow talk, Yeah.
Okay, so I will ask, I think, the last question about the ingredients that you think are the ingredients to have a successful cross-border cooperation.
I think that any kind of collaboration, and for that matter cross-border collaboration, is about mutual respect and dignity of the people. I think because everybody brings some special contribution to the table. And that contribution can vary in very, very different ways. It's not just the financial contribution, or it's not just the resources or the manufacturing contribution, but the contribution in terms of experience and expertise and a different point of view. So I think, and that can only happen if there is a mutual respect. And I think if that is there, any collaboration could be successful. And I think that would be, in my view, a primary thing.
Thank you. I think we are quite done with the questions on the chat, so we are going to also finish the event. So, Stan, I'll let you say the next word.
Merci, Satyendra.
Thank you.
Oké. Voordat we dit evenement afsluiten, willen we eerst een aantal mensen bedanken. Allereerst u, uiteraard, de deelnemers. Sommigen zijn al bij ons de hele dag, deze voormiddag, deze namiddag. Binnenkort zullen jullie alle sessies digitaal kunnen bekijken op onze website van Tripod. Je zal ze ook terugvinden in onze sociale netwerken, dus geen nood als je iets wil herbekijken.
Alors nous tenons aussi à remercier toutes les personnes et les structures qui ont été impliquées dans l'organisation de cet événement et on remercie notamment la CCI Grand Lille pour son accueil aujourd'hui et sa cellule événementielle pour ses conseils et son accompagnement dans la mise en place technique de notre événement.
We willen ook graag iedereen bedanken die meehielp aan het opzetten en organiseren van dit evenement. In het bijzonder de mensen van, Benoît de Grange, excuseer. We willen hem bedanken voor zijn tussenkomst in de Pechakucha, maar ook als coach eigenlijk voor alle Pechakucha-sprekers. Ook danken we graag de mensen van O-Medias. Jullie kunnen ze niet zien, maar wij zien ze al de hele dag. Zij hebben ons begeleid eigenlijk om dit evenement te digitaliseren. Een noodzaak in deze tijd. En we danken ook het team van Kwakwa. Zij waren de tolken eigenlijk om alles in de meerdere talen voor jullie ter beschikking te stellen.
Tout à fait. Et je vais terminer en remerciant l'équipe Interreg qui du coup nous aide dans ce projet Tripod et plus particulièrement Isabelle Dumur, François Postel et Peter Laus. Je remercie également les partenaires du projet GoToS3 et notamment Hélène Caille que vous avez pu découvrir un peu plus tôt dans la journée. Et enfin, je remercie tous les partenaires du projet Tripod et en particulier Romain pour son accompagnement dans la coordination de l'événement, Chris pour sa coordination de notre workshop, Thibaut et Louise pour la coordination de la communication et enfin je remercie Stein d'avoir accepté de co-animer cet événement avec moi.
Avec grand plezier, Alice. Dankjewel Alice, het was fijn om met jou samen te werken. Dus dankjewel allemaal, blijf zeker gezond en volg onze sociale media om de opnames te herbekijken. En graag tot ziens.
Thank you.